Hello, everybody. Hello from a cold, wet, and very windy North Yorkshire in the United Kingdom. Very different, I imagine, from what it's like in Australia. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak to the Australian Apitherapy Society. It sounds like a very exciting time for apitherapy in Australia. I'm absolutely delighted that I can speak at one of your early conferences. So my name is James Fearnely, and I've been studying a product called Propolis for 35 years nearly. And I started the Apitherapy Research Centre something like 12 years ago, and the International Propolis Research Group about 7 years ago. And in fact, we had our third international conference in Istanbul only a few weeks ago. So I want to look at, why modern medicine needs apitherapy, but basically I want to look at it through the eyes of propolis and through the eyes of how we see medicine. And I hope as I proceed, you'll understand where I'm coming from. So let's look first at modern medicine and essentially the concept of the magic bullet. Well, modern medicine is, as I see it, a very one-dimensional way of looking at our health and of medical treatment, because medicine is defined as quite simply a product, very much linked in with the idea of a synthetic, targeted, cause and effect element, which can cure the course of particular diseases. It can be antibiotic, antifungal, anti-inflammatory, all sorts of different antis. But in a certain sense, it's a very direct and one-dimensional concept. But there's a lot of problems attached to that now that we're beginning to realize. Of course, the greatest one is antibiotic resistance. Now, the World Health Organization, one of the top 10 problems, but it's not the only one. Side effects affect hundreds of thousands of people and are costing millions of pounds per year round the globe. Iatrogenic disease, the third problem, it was a term coined by Ivan Illich back in the 70s. Well, that's diseases caused by previous medical treatment. The problem is with this one-dimensional medicine, it may have a particular cause and effect, but it may also have side effects. But do we know what the effect is on previous medical treatment? We don't. And it's a huge, undefined, but very significant problem with modern pharmaceutical medicine. And Dr. Alan Rose, who was and I have to say, the ex-vice president of GlaxoSmithKline, he said, and this is problem number 4, that the vast majority of drugs, more than 90%, only work in 30 to 50% of the people. So, modern medicine is not such a panacea as we might be led to believe anyway. And if you take problem number 5, the placebo effect, and you reckon that the researchers at Harvard, for example, discovered that the placebo was 50% as effective as the real drug, then you realize that we have a very complicated situation here. What is really going on, and what is the effective element that is contributing towards health or unhealth to disease? Problem number 6 is that of spontaneous healing. And a review of many reports in the past suggests that in terms of spontaneous healing of cancer, for example, that regression is usually associated with acute infections. And we don't really know why that has come about. And my final problem, at least it's not a problem for me, is the concept of radical remission, which is also about cancer, of course. Now, Kelly Turner was a nutritionist. And she looked at 1,000 cases of radical remission from cancer. She found something like 300 and odd different reasons, but she boiled them down to 9 key factors that can make a real difference. And I want to look at those 9 key factors, because I put those 9 key factors into my 3-dimensional model of medicine, into physical medicine, social medicine, and spiritual or cultural medicine, i.e. existential medicine, medicine or energetic medicine. And I found that those 9 key reasons fitted very nicely into my 3-dimensional category. So 3 of them, as you can see, were related particularly to physical elements like radically changing your diet, or herbs and supplements, taking control of your health. 3 of them were related to the social realm, releasing suppressed emotions, increasing positive emotions, embracing social support. And 3 of them were related to the non-physical area, what we might loosely call the spiritual, i.e. things like following intuition, deepening your spiritual connection, and having strong reasons to live. But there's an element of self-evidence about this, isn't there? You know, there has always been these different elements of medicine. And this map from Healing Ourselves from Medicine, How Anthroposophy Can Save Your Life by Joachim Tan, a Filipino doctor, you can see the relationship between that pure physical medicine and non-physical medicine. So let's now have a look at how medicine was seen by the ancient. Has medicine always been seen as this one-dimensional product? Well, I think not, because medicine and spirituality, going way back, have always been related. And as it happens, also spirituality, medicine have also been strongly associated with the honeybee. Let's have a look at this. So in ancient India, the Hindu gods were associated with bees. So the gods Vishnu, Krishna, and Indra were called Madhava, the nectar-born ones. So you see, here's the priestly function in ancient India, and that priestly function, the gods, was related to the honeybee. Again, staying in ancient India, Kama, the Indian god of love, we see here in an old illustration, the god of love riding on a lion. And what's the lion riding on? It's a honeybee. We're going back 3,000 years here, or maybe more. In Egypt, Neith was worshipped throughout Egypt, but her temple became known as the House of the Bee. So in Egypt, the Egyptian medicine was directly associated with the priestly function, and the priestly function was directly associated with the honeybee. Why the honeybee? It's a question that will come up again. So looking at the ancient Hebrews, the ancient Jews considered sori a very valuable product. Sori is another word for propolis, very closely associated to balm of Gilead. But in Greece, we have another striking example of that connection between the honeybee and the priestly function, and with the priestly function, with the concept of medicine. So at the Temple of Ephesus, we're talking 550 BC now, the priestesses were called Melissa, or bees, and the priests were called Essene, or king bee. There's something deeply significant about this, and about the role of the honeybee and its role with a concept of medicine for human beings, concept of medicine and health. The Greeks, of course, have a name for being associated with the early days of medicine, and Hippocrates, the founder of modern medicine, spoke about the art of medicine. And the art of medicine consists of 3 elements: the disease, the patient, and the doctor. 3 elements: the physical, the disease, the patient, the social, and the doctor, the person with knowledge or understanding, the cultural element, the third element, the third force in human beings and in human nature. And of course, Hippocrates was said to have used propolis specifically to cure wounds and ulcers, both external and internal. The Romans used propolis for extracting stings and foreign bodies from the flesh, dispersing tumors, ripening indurations, and so on. In Persia, propolis was a drug used for eczema, myalgia, and rheumatism. In the Arab world, Hazrat Ali, we're talking 6th century AD now, 7th century AD. He said, your medicine is in you and you do not observe it. Your ailment is from yourself and you do not register it. This is a radical alternative definition of medicine, not entirely different to Hippocrates' three-dimensional element, which takes it away from the purely physical. Again, the famous Arab doctor Avicenna said, by its strong smell, he's talking about propolis, it makes you sneeze, and it has the characteristics of eliminating the spikes of the bulbs. And of course, we'll all be familiar with the famous stanza from the Quran, which refers to the honeybee, where it says, there comes forth from their bellies a liquid of many hues, in which there is healing for men. Therein is surely a sign for men who reflect. So here we have medicine. Here we have medicine, which is both related to other elements other than the physical and specifically to the spiritual, the priestly function, and very dynamically to the honeybee. If we move on to the Middle Ages, very little was heard about propolis, particularly in Europe, apart from one particular remedy which used crushed up Egyptian mummies to staunch internal bleeding. Not something I would particularly recommend myself. But in the Middle Ages too, still, there was this view of medicine and health as something outside the physical product, outside the kind of magic bullet phenomenon that we've become so used to. And the great Dr. Paracelsus in the 15th, 16th century said that the art of healing comes from nature, not from the physician. Therefore, the physician must start from nature with an open mind. So it's obvious that modern medicine is very different from the ancient concept of medicine. And one man, Rudolf Steiner, in a sense, brought us back up to date in the 1920s, when Steiner, the Austrian philosopher, said that whoever looks at a beehive should actually say with an exalted mind, making this detour by way of the beehive, the entire cosmos can find its way into human beings and help to make them sound in mind and body. This is an extraordinary statement to make, but in a sense, it's not that different from the kind of quality of meaning that was present in earlier ancient concepts of medicine that I think we may ought to be looking at again, and which can maybe help us into the future, bearing in mind the problems that we have with modern scientific magic bullets type medicine. So let's just look at propolis. What is it? Well, I don't need to tell you. It's coined by Aristotle. It means before the city. In so many ways, it is the defender of the city, but it defends that city in three different ways. It defends it in a physical way. It produces the physical entrance. They produce the physical entrance to the hive, and they block up the nooks and crannies in the hive. They create ventilation in the hive. So they're using it as a physical building material, as a physical way of defending the hive. So defending the city is the name of the game for propolis, and its components you can see here, which you'll all be familiar with. A lot of resins, but waxes and fatty acids, essential oils, pollen, and other organic minerals. But it's the resins that are the key. And it's the resins which, in a certain sense, provide the immune defense mechanism for the plants. And the resins have always been seen as very valuable in the herbal apothecary of times gone by and in today's time, because many of those resins, like frankincense, myrrh, gum mastic, benzoin, pine wood, and so on, many of those resins are very well known for their anti-inflammatory properties. So let's go back to those three functions propolis in the hive. It's a building material. It's also used to cap and sterilize the cells. In a way, it has a kind of social defense. It has a social function within the hive. And you'll have all seen the picture of the mummified mouse. If a mouse gets into a hive, then the bees can kill that mouse, but they can't move it. So they have a source of infection right in the center of the hive. What are they going to do with it? They coat it in propolis, then they coat it in wax, and that seals up that infection basically indefinitely. So you see, propolis, and I think this is the story of many natural medicines, but so propolis has a threefold defense mechanism. It provides a kind of three-dimensional immunity for the honeybee. It's physical, it's structural, it's social, it provides hygienic defense, and it's pharmacological. So it acts as an adaptogenic within the hive in its sort of, if you like, what we would refer to as antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral function. So let's look at what has happened. How have we got to a one-dimensional definition of medicine from a three-dimensional medicine? So I think we need to look to around about the 16th century, skipping a slide there, around about the 16th century, and people like Francis Bacon, who basically provided the first great stimulus to sort of objective reductive science. And that science was a science which sought dominion over nature, not relationship with nature, but control over nature. And nature, to be commanded, must be obeyed, according to Francis Bacon. And it wasn't long after Bacon's time when the Royal Society was started in 1660 with the patronage of James I. But here we can see something of the evolution of that one-dimensional road. So in the 1800s, we had the isolation of compounds. 1850, we had the development of anti-infectious agents. 1869, the first synthetic drug. And 1929, the discovery of penicillin, of course, pharmaceutical industry, with these very specific targeted magic bullet drugs that came following it. But propolis research into propolis continued throughout this time and emerged into the scientific era. But much of the research at the turn of the 20th century, much of that research was undertaken in the USSR, where there was initially no patent medicine. So there was no patent law which said you had to find an active ingredient which you could then patent and protect. So much of that research, and I've done a good deal of following through that research, much of that research was related to, does this propolis help with various conditions? And I love to show this slide because in 1975, the Kazan Veterinary Institute combined propolis with antibiotics, which they said increased the effectiveness of the antibiotics by between 10 and 100 times. I'm not going to comment on that, but except to say that at Nature's Laboratory, my own company, we've been repeating that research at the university in Leeds and found very similar results. This is very radical stuff. But there was a renaissance of interest in propolis in the West in the 70s, and Dr. Agard Lund in the 1970s looked at something like 5,000 different cases and found that propolis was very helpful in a great many of them. And Remy Chaufang, Dr. Remy Chaufang in the 70s too, says things like, the amazing fact, however, is that bee propolis has 100% killing effect on bacteria. And he goes on to say, with the introduction of bee propolis, it's possible that we can one day abolish many drug-related chemicals and their side effects. Here's where I believe that modern medicine needs apitherapy. It needs this kind products and therapies that that apitherapy is able to provide. So in the 1990s, I came along. I started a company in North Yorkshire. It was incredibly successful for a number of years because of a piece that appeared in the largest selling newspaper in the UK, the Sun newspaper. However, between 1980 and 1995, you can see the strong influence of research from Eastern Europe and the beginnings of a movement of research in the West. And in 2001, I published my research view of propolis from around the world, and it still remains the primary work in English. There are other European language publications, but in English it's still the primary work, and I'm looking to update it as we speak. So what have we understood about propolis? Well, we've understood a great deal about the chemistry. For example, 30 years ago, we thought there were about 120 chemicals in propolis. Today, we think there are somewhere in excess of 400. Of course, the more sophisticated our equipment, the more we're able to see. And I think there's a metaphor for our understanding of what a medicine is in that context. I mean, for example, we've discovered that one particular chemical, caffeic acid phenyl ester, has a particular strong antibiotic function, and yet it's never made itself into that kind of singular magic bullet. It's just something in there which assists that what we refer to as antibiotic function. But we've also understood the function of propolis for the honeybee and for the human being. So for the honeybee, I've referred to this already. We've understood that it has a three-dimensional impact for the honeybee. It provides a physical, social, and a pharmacological immune defense mechanism. And for human beings, it has quite a very similar effect. So let's look at this. Here's some work that we did in the 1990s at the University of Oxford. And Philip Calder found that the impact of propolis with bacteria is that it uncoupled them. So when bacteria start to get dangerous, they start combining together. But propolis really sort of inhibited this process. And this is illustrated further by its role in inhibiting quorum sensors. Quorum sensors are chemical signals which tell bacteria you're in with a good chance of being able to make a serious impression on this ailing body in the case of human beings. And the quorum sensor signals to other bacteria that there's an opportunity to form biofilm. Biofilm, as you know, things like MRSA, is organized bacteria. It's battalions of bacteria. It's bacteria able to, which has a will to take over. Now, there was some research done in New York about 20 years ago, looking for a drug that inhibited quorum sensors, that stopped that signal from going forward, therefore which stopped the formation of biofilm. They thought they found something which would do that, but they also said, and also there are two natural products that do this. One is propolis and the other is cranberry. So here we are, even in pharmacological terms, these natural propolis have been recognized for their natural impact on the mechanism for creating biofilm. This is really interesting, and I want to take you back to the story of the mouse that comes into the hive and the way the bee coats the mouse with propolis and therefore seals it up. Well, this is early research in the 80s, I think it was. Dr. Ben Hafstein at the University of Kiel in Germany talks about the protein coating around the virus is maintained by bioflavonoids in propolis. He says it's the same as being immune to the virus. So what's happening is that the flavonoids in propolis are strengthening, they're maintaining this protein coating for the virus and preventing the virus from becoming active within the body. So you see, in this case, the effect of propolis through the flavonoids has a sealing effect, just as we heard earlier about that uncoupling. So here it has a sort of sealing effect. And in terms of inflammation, it has a blocking effect. It's thought to block the development of prostaglandins. So it's not going in to kill anything, it's inhibiting the development of the problem. So we have something working in a different way, in a more relational way. So here's a summary. So for human beings, propolis strengthens our immune system. And of course, here we have to think, well, what is our immune system? Our immune system is supported by this uncoupling of bacteria, by this sealing of viruses, by this blocking of inflammation, and by this switching off of the quorum sensors. So, you know, we've got two radically different forms of medicine here, haven't we? One is the shock and awe, the AK-47 approach that goes in to kill the so-called enemy, the bacteria, and then we have the United Nations, which is balancing the environment within the ecology of your body, and of course the ecology within nature in general. So the continuing search has gone on for the anti and the active element, the antibiotic, viral, inflammatory, fungal, but it hasn't been found. But what we have found is something that we're calling geographic medicine. And that journey started back in 2004 when we funded a PhD at the University of Strathclyde. And in 2013, when this meeting was held, and I'm the rather overweight one on the left, in 2013, we made a very important discovery, which built on earlier work. Earlier, from 2004 to 2007, we discovered that propolis, where it was hot and wet, had a much stronger antimicrobial function. And in temperate zones, where it was wetter and colder, the propolis had a more anti-inflammatory and antioxidant function. What we discovered in the papers that were presented to me at this little mini conference in 2013 was that in an area where there was sleeping sickness in the population, inside the propolis in that area was an antitrypanosome chemical, which made me think that what the bee is doing is, so to speak, collecting the health dynamic of the plant world, transferring it into its world, and defending its own universe, so to speak. And that, given the fact that the temperature inside a beehive is very close to our body, that's the real link between the value of propolis and other bee products in relationship to the human being. But obviously it's more complicated than the product, as I've already described. So I'm giving you the sort of outline here. So that led to me setting up the Apitherapy Research Centre, and to us trying to explore even more this concept of geographic medicine. And we sent a researcher to 5 African countries to look at the relationship between the chemical composition of propolis in areas where there was malaria, leishmania, and trypanosomiasis, all 3 related to the fly as a vector for that diseases. I can't say that we succeeded much in making that connection, but what we have done is examine hundreds of different samples, and we have defined quite clearly this basic relationship between geography, chemistry, and biology, which varies by climatic zone. So I've mentioned it already. In temperate zones, there's a stronger antioxidant activity, and this is because it's dominated by the flavonoids. In subtropical zones, it has a stronger antimicrobial activity where it's dominated by the phenolics. And in the Mediterranean zones, there's a balance of the two. Now we're exploring this, and we're looking to develop a global map of propolis, and trying to pin down and ultimately try and relate it to the health demographics of those areas as well. But I think the experience of the Brazilians in the use of Baccharis dracuna caulifolia, I can't leave this concept of geographic medicine without talking about it, because the Baccharis dracuna caulifolia grows in a polluted environment, in an environment where there is the plants, where there has been mining, where the environment has become severely polluted, and yet this plant, Baccharis dracuna caulifolia, grows and loves to grow there. It creates very big, juicy resin glands in the buds, and the bees absolutely love it. And guess what? The bees are using it for their immune defense mechanism against the kind of, if you like, the cancerous environment in which the plant has found itself. And the researchers there back in 2007 were exploring the cytotoxic qualities of propolis, i.e. its ability to manage cancer cells and cancer growth. So what I proceeded to do was to try and bring as many people together looking at research as possible. So somehow we could end up with sort of collating and understanding a body of research from a global position. We held the first international conference in 2016 in Scotland, and not long after that, a matter of months, we held the inaugural meeting of the International Propolis Research Group at Strathclyde. And you can see in this picture in the middle there is Professor Vasia Bankova, who is the world expert on the chemistry of propolis. We had the second international conference courtesy of Professor Bankova in Sofia, her home country in Bulgaria, in 2018. And we're talking about 40 academic papers about propolis and its many different roles, and attendees, physical attendees of around 100 people. We were going to have the third conference in Istanbul in 2020, but we all know what happened then. So we did what we didn't think we could do. We held online conferences, and with much trepidation, we went down an unknown road. And how successful that was. We created a community not just of researchers around the world who weren't able to come to physical conferences, but were able to attend, and to attendees from all over the world, from 50 to 60 countries of people actually attending the conference online, just as we are operating online today. And there has been a very positive side, as we know, from that the online phenomenon that has been created following COVID. And the interesting thing about the last online conference is that we heard of two particular clinical trials, one with COVID-19 and the other with upper respiratory tract disease, obviously associated with COVID-19 as well. So these are first of a new tranche of clinical trials looking at the use of propolis as a conventional medicine. Members of the IPRG board are closely associated. In fact, Dr. Andressa Beretta is who's on our board, is also the chairman of the International Standard Organizations looking at propolis and other bee products. She is working with sort of 30 to 40 different countries looking to try and set standards, an incredibly difficult thing for a product as complicated as propolis. And I told you earlier on, we're looking at trying to build this global map of propolis. So we would ask you, please, any samples you can let us have, we can put it into our our database, and we have various statistical programs where we can extrapolate the relationship between flora, chemistry, biology, and look towards a much more precise understanding of the functional properties of propolis as a medicine. Of course, we have spoken about the third international conference which we had, and here we are. These are some of the board members of the conference sitting not that many weeks ago in Istanbul. You can see Dr. Beretta in the middle there, next to Professor Vasia Bankova, Professor Miguel Villas-Boas, Dr. Stefan Stangaciu, Dr. Ali Timochin, Dr. Felix Salendri, and on the far right, myself. So propolis research continues to grow. You can see there's almost an exponential curve developing there, and almost a third of those papers are related to antibiotic resistance, which gives you a clue to what's going on. Now, I want us to finish by recognizing some key facts. We need to recognize that for the honeybee, propolis provides three-dimensional immunity: physical, social, pharmacological. We also need to recognize that human beings are three-dimensional. They have a nervous system, they have a respiratory system, they have a metabolic system, and that their immune system goes down if it has a physical trauma, an emotional trauma, or if you like, an existential trauma. So our immune system is threefold. We only define it in terms of what happens when it goes down, the physical effect of when it goes down, and the impact that has on the body. What I think we must learn to do is understand why it can go up. And if we look back to that three-dimensional model of medicine that we talked about earlier, then I think we have a clue. And we also have a clue, of course, of why apitherapy is so important, because we are dealing with a relationship between the medicine and human being, which is appropriate and, if you're literally, related to the disease and to the individual. So we need to recognize again that perhaps Hippocrates is not that out of sight and forgotten, that perhaps medicine is three-dimensional. And as Rudolf Steiner, who I mentioned earlier, said, a real medicine can only exist when it penetrates into a knowledge which embraces the human being in respect to body, soul, and spirit. We need to look further. But there's a big problem about this medicine, and you all know what it is. At its worst, it's called colony collapse disorder. Colony collapse disorder is the disintegration of that threefold immune system. The bees go out of the hive, and they simply disappear. The connectors, the thing that joins and organizes the cybernetic for the honeybee, simply ceases to function. Stress upon stress upon stress upon stress has produced this situation. A situation which, to a point, and there's no point us trying to pin it down to one cause. It's not one cause, it's multiple causes, which in the end address the complex, the highly complex mechanism which represents this three-dimensional immune system. So colony collapsing is obviously worse in certain countries rather than others. But the problem, the essential problem which is being created is common throughout commercialized and throughout commercialized beekeeping, because in many places we have turned the honeybee into a one-dimensional commodity, and this has been very much to their detriment. And we need to remember the vital importance of the honeybee for man. The annual Earthwatch debate declared that the honeybee was the most invaluable species on the planet. We need to recognize what I spoke of earlier, which is the meaning of the honeybee, that it has some meaning that we need to reference back to. Why was the honeybee associated with that search of human beings for a higher, greater understanding of themselves? Why wasn't it the giraffe or the earthworm or whatever? No, it was the honeybee. It's consistent with the honeybee. You know, however much we are driven by our modern science and our, let's face it, our cynicism about religion, I think at some point we have to face the fact that there's something going on there that we need to reinvestigate if we're to understand the complexity of the situation that we are currently in as human beings. And we need to recognize what a healthy honeybee is like. You know, they found this ecotype bee at Blenheim Palace in the UK. It lived very high up in ancient trees, in crevices. It was much smaller, a black bee, much smaller, with less propensity towards disease. It tells you something. And an Australian colleague of yours, of whom I have a great admiration, has written a book called The Global Hive. And Horst, if you're watching this, hello. I refer to some of your thoughts many times, and I want to refer to them now, because we need to look upon nature and the honeybee in a far more compassionate and understanding way, in a way which explores how we feel and how we grasp the nature of what the honeybee is. And Horst says the difference between thoughts and feelings is that our thoughts keep us detached, while our feelings make us related. And that the bee crisis shows how detachment can become destructive, and that a new approach is needed, one that's related as well as objective. He also says, when all regard is lost, nature becomes a commodity, the beehive becomes a factory, the queen bee becomes a genetic machine. And finally, in relation to the loss of pollinators, he says it should be addressed not just in a scientific manner, and here's the point, but also acknowledges the way we perceive, feel, and act in response to these issues. And I can recommend an international conference which is taking place every 2 years. There was one this last April in the UK called Learning from the Honeybees. Look out for it. It's beekeepers looking at the honeybee in a new way, trying to figure out a new relationship with it. My final part, and I'm sorry I'm probably gone on too long, but my final part is to say that our social order is also three-dimensional. Our social immune, we have a social immune system, and it is also three-dimensional. It's economic and environmental, it's cultural and spiritual, and it's social and communal. And the person who I've referred to a number of times so far, Rudolf Steiner, has this to say about what he calls a fundamental social law. He says the well-being of a community working together will be greater the less the individual claims the proceeds of his work for himself. The more of these proceeds he hands over to his fellow workers, and the more his own needs are satisfied, not out of his own work, but out of the work done by others. Now think about what happens inside the beehive. Is there something we can learn? Every arrangement, says Rudolf Steiner, in a community that is contrary to this law will inevitably engender distress and want somewhere. Well, we have engendered want and unhealthiness in all three realms of our life, in our social and community life, in our economic and environmental life, in our cultural and spiritual life. Compared with 1600, 60% of people in the West now live alone. We have an epidemic of loneliness and an epidemic of mental illness. We have an uncertainty. We have massive uncertainty in our financial world and in the world of climate. And in terms of our cultural and spiritual understanding of ourselves, we don't really know where we stand. We've we've abandoned it for another set of values, and it's left us with only 2 points trying to find our direction when we get lost. Trigonometry requires 3 points. I think those 3 points are the cultural, the economic, and the spiritual, the social, the economic, and the cultural. So I'm going to skip through this because I want to move on just to tell you about a project where I've tried to incorporate all of these 3 elements into a project which can explore new medicine, new social culture, and a new understanding, new relationship with nature. And it's called the BARC. And the premise is one I've been talking about. We have to recognize that the honeybee and nature is failing. We have things called colony collapse disorder. The mechanism which keeps the honeybee together is failing. This is happening throughout the whole of nature. But we have to recognize how the human being's social life is also failing. We've talked about economic uncertainty, social division, global conflict, loneliness, mental illness, cultural and spiritual confusion. We're running the risk, we're on the edge, where the composite effect of these forces is likely to create a situation not dissimilar to that of colony collapse disorder. So why the BARC? Well, I think we've recognized that the honeybee has an absolutely critical role in nature. It has a vital role in the production of human food, in pollination, and in the quality of our food. It has an extraordinary and advanced social organization, and it produces powerful foods and powerful medicines. Apitherapy. It produces which benefit all human beings, and it is at the center of an inspirational cultural and spiritual meaning that we need to look again at. So what we are doing in North Yorkshire is developing a project which will take 3 forms. One, there'll be the BARC Discovery Centre, which will be a visitor centre which will have 3 pavilions, and we'll take the visitor through the cultural and spiritual honeybee pavilion. What's the history of the honeybee been? The social and community honeybee pavilion. How does it work? What is its impact for human beings? And the environmental and economic honeybee pavilion. What does it produce? And what is the relationship with human beings, and how important is that relationship? So it'll be an exhibition to really explore the honeybee, its importance, its meaning, and its relationship and importance for human beings. There'll be a BARC Research Institute, and we are cooperating with local universities to look at and to develop a new science of investigation, a more compassionate ecology, for example, as Horst Kornberger refers to, more like a Goethean approach to science, where we enter into the observation, where we become part of what we are observing, where we're able to sort of engage with our will to do something about it and our connection with other human beings. And the third element is the BARC craft community, where we'll be experimenting with physically living together and working together, particularly exploring the need for us to reconnect with our practical human skills. So it'll be a living space, a retreat space, craft workshops, garden, and festivals. And we feel this has a 3-fold effect within our local community, and perhaps like a healthy bee colony will have effect further afield. But the BARC is not a local project. It builds in over 12 years the support and engagement of global figures in in bee medicine research who are carrying the idea of the bee arc in their own countries. Here are 6. Here there are around about 20 who are carrying the idea of the bee arc in their own countries. And we're building a building that we hope can provide a place where we can work together, both for the honeybee and the natural world, where we can explore how best to adapt and understand how we function in this changing world, and how we can create a model of a truly sustainable and an efficient future. So this is an outline of the project, and here's the 2 floors and some of the plans and an axiometric vision of what the building could look like. And most important, here's that hexagon shape and a place where we can meet. It's an artist impression, but it's a beginning. Here's a model of the building. We've already launched it locally, and we're looking to be applying for planning permission in our national park in the spring. So I've been inspired by the honeybee for 33 years, and I'd like to build a 70,000 global beehive community, 70,000 people who are willing to say yes to this idea. We're not asking for money. Well, not at the moment anyway. We're not asking for money. I guess what we want is your support, your love, your affection, your commitment and your engagement with something which we think is deeply important, not just for our medicines, not just for apitherapy, but for our culture and for our social world. Please go and have a look at beearc.com. If you like what you see, I'd love to see your name and your country there as a supporter, however far away. And finally, thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry that I've gone over. I hope you don't cut it too much. And I look forward to more conversations with the Australian Apitherapy Society in the future. So thank you very much.